everyone being House being out of town. Are they all back? And then my understanding is that there's still some struggles with the appropriations bills, which is not the district, but that could delay things with regard to the disapproval resolutions, which would be fine with me if it's delayed. We are also talking with members in the Senate to do what we can to make sure that there aren't the votes there for the disapproval. The the besides the fact that we find it very offensive that Congress would step in like this and disapprove one of our bills, it would be very disruptive if they were to actually disapprove this bill. It's already disruptive. Wall Street has said in the past that they are very uneasy with congressional interference in the district, and it is a negative factor in their ratings. They've been very explicit about that. For example, with the continuing resolution problem last March, one of the agencies actually downgraded us from AAA. This not only would hurt us, I think, with regard to Wall Street, because it's further evidence of congressional interference with legislating where there are fiscal implications. I mean, this is totally about the city's tax code, but it would be extremely disruptive because we're in the middle of tax filing season. And maybe I shouldn't say in the middle, tax filing season has already begun. And tax filers are filing based on the instructions that reflect what the council adopted back in November. That makes perfect sense. But if the disapproval were to go through, then in the midst of tax filing, the guidance has to change. It takes a while to do that. I mean, it would be totally disruptive to tax administration. I want to emphasize that the disapproval resolutions have absolutely no effect on the federal budget or federal operations. I think we all know that, but it just speaks to what's the federal interest here. I think that some of the Republicans might view that the decoupling legislation we adopted was somehow a rebuke of the president. And while the district was not supportive of the president in the last election, this is totally about our financial plan and the revenues to the city. The CFO estimated last November that the fiscal impact of the decoupling is somewhere above $600 million over the financial plan. That is significant. That's 600 million that the mayor would have to fill in her budget formulation if the disapproval goes through. I also want to emphasize that this idea of decoupling is not unique to the district. And this also speaks to the concern about whether this is a rebuke of the president. No, there are, as of the end of last year, there were a dozen states in addition to the district that had adopted decoupling legislation, including Alabama. I mentioned that just because that's a red state. Other states that decoupled last year were Colorado, Maine, Pennsylvania, Virginia. And I also would just note that this is not about tax increases. This is about maintaining the status quo. Not only the status quo today from what was adopted in November, but the status quo in November with regard to DC taxpayers paying local taxes, doesn't affect federal taxes. I think that's obvious, but no district resident is going to see their taxes going up as a result of the decoupling legislation we adopted. So those are the arguments we are making. And all I can say is that we are fighting hard to try to stop this disapproval. With that, I'm happy to take questions. Kenny.
So in practice, if this were to pass, what would that mean for people who had already filed their taxes?
It's going to be confusion because they will get to file amended returns, but the CFO is first going to have to revise the instructions. We acted at the beginning of November under pressure from the CFO that it was getting too late for them to revise or write the instructions. So it's probably, it's at least a month, if not a couple of months, for them to revise the instructions. And the instructions are what are necessary for taxpayers to file accurately. So not only would they get to file amended returns, and of course, other taxpayers going forward are probably relying on the current instructions. It's just going to be a mess.
Have you spoken with the CFO about?
Yes, I have spoken with the CFO.
And what did he say about how they plan to handle it?
I can't remember the exact word, but it was bad.
Okay.
And I don't mean by that that he said something that was not quotable. I just mean that he used some word like catastrophe or cataclysmic or a disaster or a wreck or a mess. I can't remember which word.
Okay. And when you say the financial plan, do you mean through 2029? Which year are you talking about that time period?
Our financial plan is a 4-year plan. What we adopted last year was 26, 27, 28, 29. What we would have going forward would be when the mayor submits the budget, April 1st would be 27, 28, 29, 30.
So when you say 600 million, which of those financial plans are you talking about?
Well, the financial plan was for the one that we adopted, so through 29.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the CFO issued a revised fiscal impact statement last week on what we did with the decoupling in November. It gets a little bit complicated, and I haven't made this argument with regard to Congress, but you may remember that when we adopted the decoupling legislation, at the time, I think the initial estimate was it would be about 700 million, and I think there's some argument it might still be that much. And then about 35% of that, maybe 40% of that, was then recycled back to taxpayers in the district through the child tax credit and the earned income tax credit increase. So that would go away as well with the disapproval. Martin.
So this is introduced by Representative Gill in the House, Senator Scott on the Senate side. Neither of them, at least that I've seen, and I've asked their offices for comment, have said much about why they're doing this. Have you gotten any sense? Well, number one, have you gotten a sense from anybody on the Hill as to what their specific interest in this is and why they're pushing it? And then second of all, have you gotten a sense of why this has moved so quickly? I mean, is this standard for disapproval resolutions, or is this because this has powerful patrons that kind of want this to get done quickly?
Neither. If I remember correctly, the projected law date for the temporary is February 9th or February 12th. February 12th. So they would have to act by then. So that's why it would be moving quickly. Of course, you might wonder why it didn't get introduced until recently. I don't have an answer for that. Senator Scott and Congressman Gill have not reached out to the council, not reached out to my office. I'm unaware of them reaching out to the executive. I can only speculate why they're doing it. I think that it may have to do with what I mentioned before, that some Republicans think that this is a rebuke on the president. But as I said, that was not our thinking at all. Yes, sir. Mark.
You asked for your comments on the snow recovery efforts. We've heard a lot from some of your colleagues have been rather critical. What do you make of it? Some of the decisions about going back to school, reopening. In general, what are your thoughts?
Well, I don't really want to get into it, but I'm critical of the snow removal. I think that having grown up in a northern city, I've seen how you handle snow. You pay attention to the weather forecast, you get the plows out during the storm, and what you're trying to do is just get ahead of the accumulation. And that didn't happen. I also at this point question why we are spending money on clearing corners and removing additional snow, putting it in trucks. I have no idea how much this costs with contractors. People want to be able to drive down their street. And having grown up in a northern city, when you get plowed in, you dig yourself out. That's just the way it works. And that's what the city should have focused on more quickly. And I don't think we need to be expending more dollars, I'm guessing millions of dollars, to try to make the snow all go away.
And what about the decision to not enforce sidewalk clearing for residents and businesses?
Well, that's always been tricky and controversial. And probably it's a resource issue. I mean, residents should clear their sidewalks. And if you ask me if I've cleared my sidewalk, yes, I have. And my neighbors, which is where I used to live, and my neighbor on the other side, cleared the frontage of 3 houses, cleared several parking spots on the street.
Do you save your parking spots? Should people be able to save their parking spots?
That's very controversial as well, but no, I did not save my parking spot.
Should people be able to?
You know, I don't think I want to get into that. Maybe if you follow my example, I did not save my parking spot. Sam,
I had a question in regards to the nominations for the Historic Preservation Review Board.
yeah,
The Preservation League on December 22nd, Rebecca Miller, she expressed concern about the geographic representation.
yes.
From what I recall, I didn't quite get your take on that. I'm just trying to get a sense of, what are your thoughts around if the nominations go through tomorrow, you will have Ward 3 and Ward 5 for the most part represented, but not 7 or 8.
Well, I don't think it's a disadvantage to historic preservation in those wards that are not represented. On the other hand, I agree with the Preservation League that we would like to see geographic diversity. And there used to be more effort on the part of the executive to accomplish that. The point has been made over and over. I don't know why the executive has had a deaf ear to that.
Has there been any conversation around that since the 22nd of December?
Not on my part.
And in regards to St. Elizabeth's West and the dozen or so buildings that are up for demolition, what bearing would this entity, the Historic Preservation Review Board, what bearing would they have on that, to your knowledge?
I don't think they do. I'm not positive, but because that's federal property, I believe that goes through the Section 106 process, which is a federal process.
Got you.
I
And
mean, I don't agree with and I think the news article that I read about it noted that the GSA last year or 2 years ago said that the buildings were salvageable. In fact, it was more positive than that the buildings are usable, require some renovation. And for this new narrative that suddenly has popped up that there's a national security interest, as we know, there are a lot of false statements that come out of the federal executive to justify actions that are not consistent with law. And I think this is just one more example. And it's unfortunate because the St. Elizabeth's campus truly is a landmark.
what's your vision for development in DC? And I'm asking because
Very broad question.
I'm a contextualize a bit. There's a bit of conflict between development and historic preservation.
I think that's more myth than there is reality there.
How so?
Because you look at the history of historic preservation in the city, time and time again, we've seen development take place, including individual landmarks that have been demolished all through the historic preservation process.
So
There's a
go-
process for it.
Right.
So I think it's just folks, most recently the President of the United States with regard to St. Elizabeth, who just complain because they don't want to have to do a little bit of extra work.
So going back to the original question, the broad question, so to speak, in going through the nomination process, what is your vision, or what do you see the 3 nominees doing in terms of maintaining that balance or
Well, I
addressing
think the
that?
3 nominees are very qualified. As I recall, one is an architectural historian, the second is an architect, and the third is a public members from Ward 5. I expect that he will be sensitive to community issues around the city, not just in his neighborhood. I've known Mr. Thomas for years. With regard to the architectural historian, I have worked with her. I got to know her through work that she's doing in historic Anacostia, that historic district. Excellent reputation, cares very much about historic preservation, but also recognizes that it has to be has to be compatible with development. You know, Sam, you just to go back to that question, most of downtown is a historic district. The landmark preservation law was adopted in 1978. That's what, 50 years ago. Think of what downtown looked like 50 years ago and what it looks like today. You can have substantial development, redevelopment with historic preservation. It happens time and time again.
Even in wards that aren't considered downtown?
What's the difference between development, whether it's in a ward or downtown? Development is development. It's a developer who's interested in developing
Depends on
and
who lives
is
there.
the economics of developing. So Anacostia has been a historic district for decades, and we're seeing redevelopment taking place there.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, Ben.
In your role on the National Capital Planning Commission, you were quite critical of the current design for the ballroom.
Yes.
Mostly its size. Do you foresee that design changing, and will you support it in its current form?
I am skeptical of the current plans, and I think that was evident from the questions I asked. It is well established in architectural circles that in addition to a historic structure, now we're not talking about historic preservation law, and in fact, I believe the White House is exempt from the district's historic, in fact, I know it's exempt from the district's historic preservation law, but it is well established in architectural circles that when you add a building to the primary structure, I'm phrasing it that way, that it should not overwhelm or dominate the primary structure, which is what the ballroom does at the height and size and footprint. So you just look at the site plans where it extends way to the south of the primary building. Shalom Baranis is a highly regarded architect and has done a lot of development. I hope you heard that, Sam, a lot of development with historic properties and in historic districts. And so I think he's sensitive to these issues. Of course, he is not the decider. So we'll see to what extent they revise the plans.
Do you foresee them changing the plans at
I'm
all?
not going to second guess that at this point.
And will you support it in its current form?
I'm not sure that I want to say more than I'm deeply skeptical of the current plan.
Okay.
I think also that, you know, the fact that the president has simply asserted a program, and by that I mean all of this, the number of seats for dining and the size of the kitchen. And I'm not sure that just because he's asserted that that's what's necessary. Again, this is not his house. We all know this. This is what's clearly a federal property. A lot of people say it's the people's house. So what is the right program for that? Frankly, I'm not offended by a tent on a lawn. I've been to a lot of events in tents and I've never been upset about that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? I think folks want to get to another press conference. Sam?
Given what we saw last week with Snow Creek, how do you see the decisions of the executive playing into the conversation about teacher retention? You know, seeing as it's not only just students making the trek across the city in some cases to go to school, but it's also teachers who are trying to get into school parking lots, who might be living in Maryland or Virginia to get to get to school. You know, how do you
Sure.
see? Yeah.
So I totally get it that reopening school is can be a challenge for students who have to travel a big distance on the streets, and for educators who may not live in the city who have to figure out how to get past their streets that may not have been cleared. My understanding is that, well, I'll put it a little differently. The surrounding counties have had the same challenges we have had with the snowfall. Some are doing better. But still, so it's been a challenge. I think that the the system, the schools, so we're talking about DCPS, but the charters as well, the system needs to be flexible with teachers and students who legitimately are struggling to get through the snow to get to school. I don't feel like second guessing the decision though to open the schools.
All right. While we're on the topic, have you gotten any criteria from the executive about what would necessitate opening the school? Is there a set of criteria to your knowledge?
Not to my knowledge.
What efforts do you see yourself making to press for that during oversight season?
It may come up.
So we talking 50%, 70? What are we talking like?
Depends on how the rest of the hearing's going.
I'm just saying it's a very, teachers I've spoken with.
Well,
Yes.
you in your initial articulation of the question, you mentioned teacher retention. I would be surprised if there were teachers who quit because of this past week's snow.
Just looking at it in a greater context, especially as it relates to teachers' use of their how do you call it, their time off, using it, because teachers oftentimes they can decide whether to do that, take sick leave or whatever kind of leave they have. These are conversations that come up according to one teacher I've spoken with.
Well, as I said, I think that the systems, and I think we're thinking DCPS primarily needs to be flexible.
All right, thank you.
So no other questions? See you all tomorrow morning. I think the breakfast is at 11, no, excuse me, at 9. And committee of the whole at 11. And Mark will try to be on time just for you.